Welcome back, I'm Captain Xavier, and this is yet another video in my 2022 end-of-the-year build project vlog. And today I'm going to be answering a question that has been asked many times in the comments. Is it possible to feed a Springer using a Proton pack? Well, the short answer is yes! Let's go to the range, and I shall demonstrate, and then I shall explain how. Right, I'm here on the range. It's cold, damp, but it's not raining. So we're gonna run with it. I have my Rivalburn, which is normally fed from a standard Rival stick mag. Like so. Lovely, lovely. But can it be fed with a Proton pack? Train! A very slow-moving one. Sweird. Train! Right. Where was I? Right. Rivalburn with Proton pack. Will it feed? Let's find out. Hit the bottom. I got one. Got all the accuracy of Rival. But, as you can see, it will in fact reliably feed even at a reasonable rate of fire. So, let's go talk about how I made that work. Right, so how did I get that working so smoothly? Well, it didn't require any additional upgrades to the tank. I already had the additional signal wire that allows me to manually activate it, which I need because I don't have flywheels to rev, so I can't use the current sensor. And then I simply had to wire a switch onto the Rivalburn. So, backpack plugs in right here, and then there's a switch here at the front. I was originally going to mount it either towards the middle or towards the back so that it didn't actually turn on until you were partially primed. Someone in the comments suggested that it might work better if it was up here so that there was a little bit more time for the tank to kick in and apply pressure, and so it would chamber better. And it turns out they were in fact right. It also was convenient that there was a beautiful spot right here to mount it. I just had to Dremel a little bit for the leads and then tap in a screw, and now when you prime the blaster, the switch releases, which activates the tank because I have it wired to normally closed. So when you press the switch, the circuit is disconnected. When you release the switch, it's turned on. And so it has the amount of time it takes me to actually prime it back for the tank to kick in and to force rounds up, and then as soon as the breech opens, it forces a round in, and I close it, and then when it gets forward, it turns the tank off. So you're not constantly revving without the rounds actually able to go anywhere. So you're not wasting your battery life nearly as much. And as you saw, it does in fact feed incredibly reliably. I also did have to make one other modification to the blaster. The breech right there at the top of the magwell was a little bit too small, and rounds would occasionally catch, especially when they're been a little bit damp and might have swelled a little or different sizes or have grit on them or whatnot. So I dremeled that out a bunch, and I did make one or two modifications to the magazine adapter that I had. One, I took off the feed lip that would prevent the rounds from coming out. I think that might have been catching stuff. And I sealed the gap right here. So along this ridge, it's usually open, and I just filled it with hot glue. I don't know how you can see that. And that seemed to help as well. And so now it feeds, as you saw, quite reliably. Reliably enough that I would actually be willing to run this if I was ever in a situation where I wanted to run a Rivalburn, which I don't know when that would ever come up, honestly. But it works. Now, what about other blasters? Because I know you're going to ask, well, would it work with this? Would it work with that? Let's go take a look at a couple of other magazine-fed blasters and see if they can be made to work. So, back to the range. Let's go. Right, try some other blasters on the range. We have the Finisher. What do you know? It will. Next. How about an Apollo? I'd love to claim I was aiming for that bottle. I wasn't. The Apollo does in fact work. Next. Here's one that's good enough I might actually develop it further. My Helios with pump kit. Will it work? Yes! Yes, it will. Let's go talk about how I'm making this work. Right. So how did I get these to work? These do not have a switch wired onto them. These were, in fact, completely unmodified. Well, this one's obviously got the kit on it. These still had their Goodwill stickers on them. That's how unmodified they are. So how did I make that work? Well, I used the manual switch that I used if I wanted to just spew rounds. And I just had it held in this hand and was able to just push the button, which is why you can hear the tank feed is very unreliable and random almost. But the concept is solid. They do in fact work. You would simply have to wire a switch on, and you could do it really easily. You could mount a switch right here in front of the slide so it released it. You could probably do it on that one. Here, it would be super simple. In fact, I actually did do it at one point. You could mount a switch right here so that the arm presses it when it comes forward. If you wanted to get really fancy, you could wire a switch internally, which would be the much better option with these ones. This one doesn't really have an internal. So, I mean, here obviously you could put it easily, find somewhere in there that you could make it so that the button gets pressed at the appropriate time, and then have a jack somewhere. So magazine-fed ones work beautifully. Now, not all magazine-fed ones. It's got to be ones that this magazine setup will fit into. So the handle-fed ones or this one, it's not going to work in something like the Atlas or the Hypnos, where it's a long magazine that goes in the back. This will prevent that from actually feeding properly. And if you try to use a 12-round one, this still doesn't fit, unless you modify the blaster. Or you would have to make a modified adapter of some kind. The goal here, again, as with everything in this series, was to make it so that the blaster would still work without a proton pack. So all of these will still take a normal stick mag. They were unmodified. This will obviously still take a regular stick mag. And that's one of the requirements that I have for this series anyway. Train? Let's take a look at some other rival blasters that will not work so easily, but that probably could be made to work. So here are 3 additional blasters that all have slightly different feed mechanisms, and how would a proton pack work with them? Well, we'll start with the Kronos. Some people asked about things like the Saturn or the Takedown, and they're all basically Kronos clones. They have an internal magazine of some kind. And the problem with that is that you have to overcome the tension on those feed lips. And the proton pack just doesn't have enough force to feed around down into that reliably. You would need to disable or remove those before you would be able to reliably feed from a proton pack. And then you'd have the issue of you'd need to mount a proton pack, which wouldn't be too difficult. You could come up with a mount that just put that right there and you know, fed directly. And in fact, I wonder, you could probably actually use this hose adapter, the surface mount one that I've been using on hoppers. Yeah, that would work fairly easily and would feed directly into the chamber, but you would have to get rid of those feed lips and possibly have to disable the internal magazine so the proton pack doesn't force rounds down in. You need it to feed right in front of the bolt so it will load. And at that point, this will not work with anything but a proton pack. Now, those modifications could almost certainly be made to be reversible, but they wouldn't be easily reversible. You couldn't have something that, say, socketed in and held the feed lips open because that would get in the way of the bolt when it goes forward. You might be able to make some way to disable those that's easy to reverse, but it wouldn't be as simple as sticking in a magazine. But it obviously can be made to feed. And that would go for anything that has an internal magazine. There's a dozen or so probably out there now that have that internal magazine design that the Kronos was the first of. It'll work with any of those, so that would be lovely. The next one would be a single shot one, like the Knockout or whatever the Elite or the AccuStrike one is, can't remember the name. It's got a breech that opens there. Now, this you would probably want to make it so the breech opened up a little further, which is really simple to do internally, so that you could actually feed into there. And then again, it would just be a matter of figuring out how to mount your hose right above it so it would feed directly into it. It would be possible, it would be absolutely silly and horrifically inefficient and hilarious, and, you know, that would be fabulous. Again, it wouldn't be too hard to wire something internally so that opening the breech turned on the backpack and closing the breech turned it back off again. You absolutely could have a single shot proton pack fed rival blaster. Again, silly but functional. Now, the most functional of this kind of style would be the Meteor. Because it has a completely different feed mechanism than any other blaster other than, I think it's the Orbit. That one, unfortunately, the feed is right where your shoulder is, and that would, you'd have to have the hose going in. And so I didn't look at that one. But this one, it almost feels like it was intended to have a proton pack, or at least a speed loader or something. Because there is, in fact, a socket on the bottom that has a catch. And what that goes to, I have no idea. That feature never materialized. What their plan was there, I don't know that we have any idea. But if you could make an adapter for the proton pack hose that socketed into there, you could just feed directly into this. It will, in fact, work. All you'd have to do is pull the follower back, and it will, in fact, feed rounds right past that follower. That's a very weak spring. The proton pack can feed past that. I did test it. I'm not going to bother demonstrate. You know what? I can demonstrate it. Why not? Can we feed into... Yep. As you can... Well, yeah, you can see. It fed right in, no problem. And now we've got too many rounds in here, and the thing is going to blow its brains out. But yeah, of all the non-magazine fed options, I feel that this is the most viable because you could easily just hook up to that socket and then it would feed from a proton pack, and you'd have a nice little compact springer that feeds from a proton pack, which would be pretty nifty. You might be able to get the Orbit too also, but then the hose would be coming right out the back, which might be awkward, but you could probably deal with that if you really wanted to. It is such a svelte blaster after all. Anyway, that's my thought. I may follow up on this one, I may not, depending on how difficult it would be to actually design that socket. If anyone out there wants to give it a try, do feel free and let me know. But if you have any further questions, comments, concerns having to do with springers and proton packs, by all means, leave a comment and I will probably snark at you. But there will be more. Thank you for watching. Wait for it!